What was I if not denied before I could even try? Always too much before I shared but a section of my all. How could I grow in a place I was expected to thrive from when I wasn't even allowed to share what wasn't even but a fraction of my fragmented body I was to dissolve? Wasn't it like in choice, a solution curtailed from what Lacan allowed to come in the place of his seminar as a speaker that likely in all of his seminar years posited the best of analytic series that wasn't even him. And that's why I posit a lot of fine-headed ears to the women that help the men in the place of having that imaginary phallus from the man that the signifier of antiquity wasn't even strong enough to maintain in the traditions it yanked on their children to have to shine in, to perhaps permit of the predicated sins of man to be that he wasn't horrible enough before thinking that he had to protect himself of the horrors the others were inflicting on him. What if the horror that he inflicted on them was their very condition, the liberation from the suffering they thought they had to undergo as a process of some guilty original sin thing? What would you do to be the original sin that the fetish would make use of if the phantasm wasn't spelled with a PH like my name was, to complicate the F that rather sounded quite similar but wasn't ascertained through the same principality of course? Would a university outside the university see that Kierkegaard was finally integrated after it was too late to have him contribute beyond what he gave to a world that could have taken more? What is the university to drug addicts, the bums, and those without a home, to have a roof and warmth to live under, food to eat, when all of the resources science has now gained the quantum of capacity to expand, still suffering in some that have trivial isolations impelled on them because of the vast seniority of their right to have cast themselves on the shame and boredom for what they could have swelled, and happiness sharing the charge on to those willing to take it gladly, giving more than what could have even been conspired towards, breathing together. So, even further than the chemical-induced matrimony of the perfect love experience, the final ego dissolution slanted, was there a scission scene of the Australian New Lacanian school made of what I passed on as a mere concept of what I later saw in perfect presentation as a stick in my fork? I mean, a wheel to the fork I was putting in it without wanting to, giving the soul power to a force not responsible of its weight, and even buried in it, that would be again another charge to do the tangled knots that I wasn't quite interested in having started. So words were not quite what made these knots themselves in their forms already tangled in their vision merely. Offering a Huxley without the need for any assassinations after checking in with the government confirms what may or may not have to move forward then, if allowed, and not taking the grant to do so on their own at the risk of, and given the presentation as so clearly demonstrated, perhaps those of which the shock collar was either found because it had been addressed to them, not listened to because obviously Facebook recordings don't work in the alien Australian subtraction. What could the courts of man have seen a trifling compliment deployed? It wasn't about the fat man, but about the man's knowing of his weight and sitting for the plate that took his hand. The fat man wasn't quite fat, but the skinny one might have been for the food he was lacking. Lacking not because the fat man took more than he had to, but because the fat man was skinnier than the skinny man. What about these coincidentia positorum, causing opposites to unite and their differences to settle long overlooked imbalances because of the alienating capacities of capitalism to overlook the Oedipus fantasies and that production of profit that discourse counts on to ensure the social link where taboo in its form on it of the original sin is the operator of law, not of fantasy and error. So then, purportedly, also too, not the inflictions of it prior to its bearing. Also then in its place bared when unblameable, blamable when proper in the place where hell was ordained.